Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this dialogue. And my guest today is Dr. Tedros Zaudu, who's come all the way from Canada. And he's with me here in the studio, and he's going to share with us some of his observations regarding current issues unfolding in Ethiopia, including TPLF war of aggression, the deafening silence of the so-called international communities, and the media campaigns, the propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, all these. So do stay with us. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I am so happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let me just jump right into it and begin our conversation. As you know, the TPLF has plunged into another state of confusion, as you know, following its attack on the central government. And it is still trying to shift the blame on the government. And what's really ironical here is that, as you know, the so-called international communities are still silent, conspicuously silent at the expense of their age-long bilateral relationship with Ethiopia.
To my understanding, you know, the last word of Herman Cohen in 1991 in London, while he was making peace between the various political parties, the last word was no democracy, no cooperation. That was the promise of America for Ethiopian people. Yet, the Ethiopian people for the past 27 years, they have witnessed the presence of oppressive government. At the same time, the U.S. was silent. And then we need to go back and then examine what was promised for us, and then compare it to their acts in today's critical time. And to me, they have yet to make a peace with the Ethiopian people, because in 1991, their approach was they're overthrowing a socialist regime. And then the Ethiopian people weren't part of that negotiation. They brought rebel groups and then imposed them on Ethiopian people. And then at the same time, the world was singing the notion of globalization. They were saying that time and space have collapsed, and then time and space are shrinking. We live in one big villages, one big village actually, and then yet globalization. Yet what was imposed in 1991 under the supervision of the West was what I call the system of colonization. You know,
system of colonization.
Colonization. You know, when we examine coronas, they have, this colonization, what I call colonization, it has three distinctive characters.
This is your own coinage, right?
This is my coining,
okay.
Yes. And then character number one is distancing yourself from your next door neighbor. You have to separate yourself. You have to remove yourself. You have to create a space between you and your neighbor. And then what the TPLF did in Ethiopia in 1991, and then using the constitution, was separating families, separating ethnic groups from each other, and then preaching them to distance themselves. Not only that, to distance themselves from the Ethiopian history, because they were told that Ethiopia has only been living, the Ethiopian history existed only for 100 years. That's again separation of Ethiopians from their own history. And then the second character of colonization is the mask. You have to shut your mouth. And then rigging election is shutting the people's mouths. You see, shutting the people's mouths.
Silencing the voices
of the masses. You see, that was the second character of this colonization system. While the world was being governed using the notion of globalization, the notion of oneness, forward looking. You say from this point forward, we all belong to the future. But what the Ethiopian people were told in 1991, you have to go back to your past, stay in the past.
Right.
Forget about the present. You know what I mean? And then
Exactly.
and then the third character of this colonization is the meaning. If you recall, at the beginning of the corona epidemics, the WHO came up with this notion, social distancing. And then 3 months later, they said, no, we don't want you to distance yourself socially. We want you to distance yourself physically. So they changed it from social distancing to physical distancing, because in the presence of today's technology, you can still have this social contact with others. You can have a coffee with others while you are sitting in Addis, your mom in Paris, or your brother in the US.
Exactly.
You can do that. But there is physical distancing, the requirement of physical distancing. So what was imposed in Ethiopia using this democracy? So they, the people were told not to examine the empirical reality. You see, the reason why they shifted from social distancing to physical distancing, because social distancing doesn't really reflect the empirical reality on the ground. So those three characters were imposed on our people, and then that speaks volume why they are silent today, and then because they never made a peace with us. I feel like the Cold War is still going on. But we want the U.S. government or the West to come and examine the empirical reality. They have the technology. They don't even need to come here to examine. They can see from their using their modern technology who started the war, who is the aggressor, who is the victim. What kind of damages were made, and then they can all examine that from space, and then they do have the technology to examine that. Yet they refuse to do that.
They are paying little or no attention to the cries of Ethiopians, to the call of the government to strongly denounce the terrorist acts of the TPLF, but rather they are keeping silent, and this silence, many say, is tantamount to territorial infringement of this East African nation. What's your take on that?
Indeed, because you see, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, they have yet to have colonial masters, and then this lens should be used to examine the geopolitics. You know what I mean? Because other part of Africa, they are still somehow entangled with the British Empire, with the French Empire. They are somehow entangled with that. But Ethiopia, Eritrea, and Somalia, they have yet to be dominated officially with the colonial masters.
Right.
And then that's the entry point to them. Who's going to be the dominant power in this part of Africa? Who's going to be the dominant power? The Russians, the Chinese, or the West? You see, that's the battle, and then this denies our sovereign rights. What the PLF was doing actually was fragmenting the nation state using multiple channels. At the beginning of the war, in November 2020, I was in Canada, and the framing was a Nobel Peace Prize winner declared war against his people. The framing was that, but that wasn't the case. The case was that PLF declared war
on the central government.
Exactly, on the central government, and then this wasn't the framing. Part of the framing. So for the past 2 years, they have been misleading the world using multiple channels, the multiple channels, and then still coming to Ethiopia from that angle. The central government is harassing or victimizing its own people. But that's not the case. The central government is doing what it can to assist its own people. The fact that the central government cares about its own people, not part of the discussion. They don't want the world to know that the central government actually cares about its own people. people of Ethiopia in all parts of Ethiopia, including Tigray. But the message to the world, the Western media and then the Western government is broadcasting this message saying that the central government doesn't really care about its own people. That's not the case. Therefore, the silence is coming from that angle. So the framing is very important, and then we have done our part to show the world that you need to look at it from this angle. This framing doesn't really represent the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
And then we're not declared the central government is not at fault here. The rebels groups are at fault, and they're the one who are victimizing their own people. Their own people. I mean, calling themselves the Liberation Front, but they have yet to liberate their own people from aggression. While they were in power, it's in the public domain. The record is in the public domain. They were saying it openly. 1.9 million people were somehow on food safety nets.
Right.
And then that speaks volume. That speaks volume. You have the power to distribute resources fairly and equally, but lack of fairness made your own people depend on foreign aid, and then they that you can just examine the records. Then the record is there, but they refuse. The West refuse to examine the record, and then they enjoy misleading the world.
Dr. Tedros, on the other hand, as you know, the government of Ethiopia is discharging, I think, its civil responsibility of ensuring rule of law, by protecting its citizens, as this is the mandate of the government. However, again, some Western media outlets seem to be sulky about it and try to, by hook or by crook, come up with something in order to disrupt this noble cause. Not only that, they try to tarnish the image of the government. And again, this thing, I think, takes us back to the issue of internal affairs of this East African nation. What are some of your observations here?
Okay, my observation is that this branding of Africa as a continent incapable of governing itself, and then using Ethiopia as a poster child to say that they're incapable of governing themselves. In 2020, the whole world was crying about Black Lives Matter. That was the headline news, Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
But the branding was dangerous to the American dream. So, and then they somehow shifted the headline news from Black Lives Matter, look what the Africans are doing to each other. So now nobody talks about Black Lives Matter. The issue have yet to be resolved.
Yeah.
But the focus is now look at the focus is on Africa. You know what I mean? Saying that
Exactly.
Look at them, they're just killing each other. Forget about this Black Lives Matter. So the meddling starts from their own self-interest, from their interest to promote their brands. Their brand, this American dream brand, saying that this is the brand that the whole world should not emulate, not imitate, but the whole world, just look at it and then be
Submissive, maybe.
submissive.
Yeah.
Yes, submissiveness.
Right.
They don't want you to emulate or imitate that system, because if that was the case, this war brought to the surface what the PLF did, ignoring the Constitution. They called an election. There was only one federal body to monitor elections in Ethiopia. They created their own one election board. That was against the Constitution. But the West is still saying that this group conducted an election. You know what I mean? So there was no rule of law. and then declaring war against the central government, meaning that risking the sovereign nation, risking it to the age of fragmentation, and then no government will tolerate that. No government will tolerate that. No democratic government will tolerate that when its own army murdered at night. No central government in the world will tolerate that. But the Ethiopian central government are still being pressured to ignore that fact and then be submissive to the propaganda machine that says that the Nobel Peace Prize winner declared war. That's not the case. And so the meddling started from their own self-interest. So we the Ethiopian people need, and then including the African people, we must cautiously, scientifically work for our own self-interest, and then when we see the meddling of other nations, this is the continuation of the slavery system. This is the continuation of the colonial system. Meddling, they come, and then because you are incapable of governing yourself, and then we are capable of governing the soil. The last election, the election that was conducted, speaks volume on the wishes and the wills of the people. The people went out without being forced, and then voted, saying that this is the kind of government we want. But they, the West, and their government and their media don't really care about our election, the last election. Don't really cover it, and then they ignore it basically, because that speaks volume. Your will and wishes don't matter to us. What matters here is our self-interest, not your self-interest. So when we speak of the meddling, we need to bring the whole picture and then examine it from multiple angles. Then we come to a very empirically grounded understanding of the situation. Right now, what's missing in the analysis of the West, what's missing in the discussion of the media in the West, is empirical reality. The empirical reality is not being discussed. What's being discussed is the various pamphlets, propaganda pamphlets, are being discussed as if they relate to the empirical reality. But there is no relationship between these multiple pamphlets and the empirical reality. The empirical reality speaks volume about who's the aggressor, who's the victim in this case, and then they have yet to bring that to the surface, and then the fact that that speaks volume.
Absolutely. On the other hand, I'm sure that you have been following this. The international community has never openly condemned the TPLF, which the government of Ethiopia has labeled a terrorist group. But they just either pay no attention to it, or they try to, bring both the government and the TPLF on equal footing, and they force or they push the two sides to this negotiation table. Why are they resorting to such course of action, in your view? What's the reason behind that you see?
I think the reason behind is again, not wanting to see an African nation such as Ethiopia capable of making a law. We have a law, and then the rule of law must dictate. The people must obey the rule of law. And then what the past 2 years speaks clearly to us is the aggressors don't really care about the rule of law, don't really care about the constitution of Ethiopia, don't really care about the federal government, and then so when you have a Western nation not condemning a rebel group that was actually leveled because of XYZ, because of what they have done, not because of the perceive. This is not about perception.
Right.
This is about concrete empirical reality. They started the war, they murdered members of Ethiopian Defense Force, and then they exposed and risked Ethiopians for multiple channels of aggression, and then yet the West yet to condemn them as a terrorist. In fact, against the wishes and against by going against the empirical reality, the U.S. Special Mike Hammer. I mean, this is just unbelievable. A diplomat taking selfie with
terrorist
organization. After what they have done to the Ethiopian people for the past 2 years. That speaks volume, meaning that your law means nothing to me. You know, what we want from the West is to respect us with dignity. We have a law. We are a law-obeying people. We obey the law.
Yeah.
And then we are capable of making a law. And then what they need to do is to come and consult our law, check the empirical facts, and then make a statement.
Right.
But they're not interested in consulting the law or checking the empirical reality. But they're more than happy to make multiple press statements from the comfort of their office somewhere in the West, and then come here and take a selfie, so this kind of political activity must be stopped. When we say we are sovereignty, the meaning of sovereignty is you are entitled to make a law.
Yeah.
Also, other nations to respect your law. You know, and then this yet to be the case in Ethiopia. Yet to be the case in Ethiopia. And then the past 2 years speaks volume on that. And then our situation is on that. And then so we, the Ethiopian people, you know, the movement, the No More movement is about that. We don't want you to meddle in our affair. We are capable of governing ourselves. And then but this mentality, the colonial and slave mentality, saying that you're not capable of governing yourself, we are capable of governing you. In fact, an Italian members of parliament 3 years ago, the members of parliament made a statement saying that the solution to Africa problem is recolonization. You know what I mean? They're coming at us from that angle. And then when other nations are looking at you as a country incapable of governing itself, this is very dangerous. You know what I mean? What they have done for the past 27 years using the TPLF was an extension of the Cold War, creating a tension between the people, and then leading to the point of fragmentation. You know, the Cold War may have ended in Europe in 1989, but yet to be the case in other part of the world. You know, the Cold War was about who can be the dominant power in the world. Now that the battle is using Africa as a battleground, and then various powers are waging war. Said, I am the dominant power, you're not the dominant. This is among themselves, the West. The African people are now respected in this regard. And then the Ethiopian case speaks volume on that. The Ethiopian government saying that I have the mandate of the people to protect and preserve the dignity and sovereignty of the people.
Yeah.
You know, this government has a mandate. For the first time in the history of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian people actually willingly voted and then elected this government. So this government has the mandate of the people, but this goes against their international order, meaning that we give you the mandate. You have no right to give a mandate to your own government. We give the mandate we the one who can give, we give the mandate.
So we clearly see their patronizing or condescending attitude toward Africa.
Exactly. You see, actually, prior to the prior, 2 weeks ago,
Yeah.
the Ethiopian government did what it can to
Yeah.
facilitate
Yes.
Absolutely. Aid, from the port,
Yeah.
and then delivering to the people of Ethiopia and Tigray. The government is seeing them as the people of Ethiopia and Tigray.
Of course.
The West is seeing them as not part of Ethiopia.
A separate entity, something
Separate
like
entity are being victimized by the central government. No. Again, the framing. We see them as the people of Ethiopia who are living in Tigray. And then we need to work on the framing. The framing is very important to deliver a message. This misinformation, deception, and disinformation campaign is anchored.
Thank you so much for your ideas.
Thank you for having me. You guys are doing a wonderful job. Please keep up your great work. As I said, we have a lot to do to inform the world.
Yeah.
And then you guys are at the front of informing and educating the world. And then I said, just keep doing what you are doing.
Okay, thank you, sir. Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Thank you as well for having been with us. Until I see you next time with another program, it's goodbye from me, Shifar Alaikum.